This is Game of Kings, Part 1, Chapter 4, Twice Taken. So this is Lymond breaking up the company, his men. And I just want to point out a few interesting things. So firstly, this is, I think, in Will's POV. Will basically is saying to himself, why had he imagined, top of page 332, by the way, why had he imagined that the company would be perpetual? It had been created at Lymond's whim and was being disbanded by the same lordly hand. Scott took to watching for the return of the weekly messenger at Ostrich. So that's Will Scott being like, well, of course this was never going to be perpetual. Lymond made this band and it would be ended just as easily, which I think is just demonstrating another sort of immature thought pattern of Will, how he just finds that this is it, this is the ultimate new thing that I must do, but doesn't realize how organic and changeable all situations are. It's, you know, he waltzed into this crew thinking, this is it for me, this is who I'm gonna be. Because yeah, at the moment, Will's identity is basically like whatever he thinks is like the coolest thing. He isn't grounding his identity in character traits, but in sort of an external identity rather than an internal identity. And that was the same with Mariota. Like, she ran away to find Lymond, sort of to find Lymond. You know, Lymond pointed out to her, well, what did you think? Were you just going to live with me forever with my men? Like, what did you think of the practicalities of that? Like Lymond also pointed out to her, like, where are you grounding your identity in something so fragile and changeable? So yeah, I really like the variation that we get. Mariota and Will Scott are, I'm assuming, the same age. We know that Mariota's 19 and Will is probably 19. They've got a lot of similar traits. Lymond gives his little goodbye speech, kind of encourages the men to go out and find the world. That's page 332. That's really nice. You've finished teething and now there's the world. Crack it open if you can. It's moments like these that just melt my heart, I swear to God. And then Will is trying to like go off with Lymond by himself, but Matt wants to come along and Will is like, damn it. Matt attached himself firmly to Scott, who attempted to argue and only succeeded in making him obstinate. So that was bottom of 332, top of 333. Will was trying to shake Matt so that Matt wouldn't come with Will and Lymond. It's nice to see that Will tried to do that, because obviously we know what happens after that. They get captured, Matt dies, and at the end of the day, like, Matt literally dies because of the actions that Will took. So, well, you could argue that Matt could have been let go and freed, but I think someone in Matt's position would never have thought he would be freed if he was associated with Lymond. Now that I think Andrew Hunter is the big bad, Andrew Hunter wouldn't have let Herky Matt live. Absolutely not. And I think Matt would have known that deep down, even if he was given assurances, it would be bad for him. So anyway, we know that Will's going to set this trap for Lymond, and the whole time I'm reading this and it's like watching a train accident. And I love it. You know what I really love? I love captured and tortured heroes. I love heroes in a tight spot who are fallen to their absolute lowest point and cannot do anything. And that's why I love this chapter so much, because I loved seeing a tortured Lymond. I only want more of that, not gonna lie. We love torturing our heroes. Every one of you loves tortured heroes because you've read this book. You can't lie to me. Page 334, Matt's being like, oh, it's the second sight. I'm damned if they saw us, when Andrew Hunter's men seem to know exactly where they're going. Matt's like, they didn't see us, bro. How do they know where we're going? And Lymond's like, they know where we're going. They didn't see us. They expected to find us here. They're Balagan men. I love the moment where Lymond basically makes Scott go into the basement of the convent first, and he like pushes him down and takes his sword. Oh, I want to see this in a live action. And Scott just stumbles down. Lymond is so pissed. Like, it's terrifying. The absolutely terrifying. You lead another trick and I'll kill you. So this is page 334. Matt's still pretty clueless. He's like, what's happened? Will is trying to rub this into Lymond. Why Will took Lymond to the convent where his sister died is fucked up. Like, it's really twisted. Like, absolutely twisted. And Lymond makes a really good point when he says, well, like, because Scott is being like, don't you feel anything? This is page of 336. Your sister died here. And Lymond's like, well, if I killed her, why should I feel anything? Because if he killed her, then clearly he's psychopathic and wouldn't care. And if I didn't kill her, I'm not likely to be goaded into a triple settee. So, I mean, like, good point. If you went to the place where a family member was brutally killed in a fire and you were the one that purposely started the fire, you wouldn't be affected by it because you're crazy. And if you didn't start the fire, you aren't about to go there to set fire to yourself. I really like how Lymond's like, are you prepared to take responsibility for Matthew's death? Because, you know, he's holding the torch about to light up and explode this underground compartment. The next thing Scott says was, she was called Eloise, wasn't she? Why did she die? And Lymond replies, because in this age only the intolerable have survived. So essentially, Lymond loved his little sister. He loved her. Or at least he had a really high opinion of her character. Because that's a very high compliment coming from Lymond. Lymond doesn't give out compliments. That's like one of the first compliments he's ever given to his, and it was to his dead sister. Then basically, I was reading this thinking, would Scott really kill himself? But Lymond made a point, you're dealing with hysteria, not guts or lack of them. Which is to say that people, when they are pushed to their wits' end, it doesn't matter if they're willing to die or not. They're just not thinking straight. They're just impulsive. And Scott is highly vulnerable to being in states like that because of the character we've already seen come out of him. I love the line, but this is the middle of page 336. Big bangs and primary colours appeal to the young. Oh my gosh, his insults of Scott are just they land so well. Primary colours. My opinion, someone needs to do fan art where Lymond gives Will Scott a colouring book and some crayons. And Will is like, ooh. And this whole scene where Lymond and Will are tumbling on the ground in the dark, bottom of page 337. To feel Lymond, the cool, unassailable Lymond, wince beneath his grip. It was bitter delight. He pressed with all his weight and felt the other man jerk. Scott is evil here. I mean, in this chapter, I am so annoyed with Scott. Scott is scary here. Like, Will Scott is dangerously scary. And you know what really annoys me about this is that Lymond really didn't think Will was going to betray him. Lymond really didn't. And he's really good at predicting character, and for him to not predict that Will would do this makes me think that Lymond is missing something. And I think what Lymond is missing is he's not seeing the extremely strong motivation that Andrew Hunter has to make sure that Lymond remains guilty, and how much Andrew has done potentially to be an earworm into Will Scott's inner world. And I talked about this in the previous video. Like, I think that's the one factor that Lymond has not taken into account, is the influence that maybe Andrew Hunter had over Will. But it's just a little bit weird that he didn't kind of predict this, because Scott had betrayed him and done like crazy things twice before. Once when he went to Hume Castle when he wasn't supposed to, and the second time when he met with his father and put the men at danger. We all, as readers, saw this coming again. Like, that's two things that Will did that were kind of a betrayal. And Lymond also knew that Will was communicating with Andrew Hunter. It's just kind of weird that Lymond didn't think this through. Okay, the reason he didn't think it through is because he's at wit's end, but I don't know. He's not perfect. I just have to accept that Francis Crawford is not actually a god. I think that's my problem, is I'm like, how did he not see this? Isn't he omnipotent? Sorry, omniscient, I think is the word I want. So that's my bad, There was a really lovely line where, when Lymond was stabbed, and oh my goodness, not knowing how badly he was stabbed, my heart like lurched, and obviously I know that Lymond has to survive at least until the 6th book. So I knew he wasn't going to die, but this scene on page 338 where Matthew, working through the darkness from wall to wall, found and fell on his knees beside Lymond. That is just the sweetest moment, I think, of friendship that I've seen in this book so far. You know, Matthew wouldn't have known how badly Lymond would have been injured because it was all pitch black, but he just wanted to get to Lymond because he knew Scott had gotten up on him. It was really lovely. I love the description of Lymond once they got out of the underground, and now they're about to head off to back to Threve Castle. He was as dirty as Scott, the stained white shirt gaping between broken points, and his face white with shock and masked with stone dust. That's a really beautiful picture of Lymond just covered in dust and blood. Sorry, Lymond. That's actually a bit creepy that I said that. Anyway, here I am accusing of Will of being like, Will, why are you so weird for making Lymond want to wince? You're just crazy. But we all want to read it. We all want to read the stuff that Will does. Oh my gosh. Lymond never would have gone to this convent. This is the first time he's gone to the convent since his sister died. Like, he's dealing with this the whole time that they're going through this. So I think Lymond is probably really good at sort of blocking stuff out that's not relevant. And he would have just been focusing on trying to get out. So then we get to the part where he's walking back with Andrew Hunter to Threve, and I'm not going to go through this again in much detail because I spoke a lot about Andrew Hunter in the previous video. But I do want to just point out one little cool thing. So this is also page 339. Lymond's like, do you usually bolt your rats with other people's terriers? So Will Scott is the rat for Andrew Hunter, but Lymond thinks he's a terrier because a terrier is such a good description of Will, and it's so funny. Oh my god, every time Lymond talks about Will, it's just so comical. Andrew's like, no, your friend came to me of his own free will. No, says Lymond. And then he says, I gotta get this out here. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So he says that back to Andrew Hunter in response to Andrew Hunter saying, no, Will came to me of his own free will. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. What Lymond is saying here, I believe, is that Will is finally becoming wise, and the first step to being wise is being fearful of the Lord, i.e. fearful of Lymond. So Will has finally realized that Lymond is probably someone that he should fear, and he acted on that. At least that's how I've interpreted that. Okay, and then Matt breaks away and dies, and this is the first death we've had. And I kind of didn't really go through and predicted who would die. I do expect that there will be multiple deaths per book that we read. But here when Matt is dying, I just want to make one comment, because obviously it was really sad. I really liked Matt. I loved his relationship with Lymond. Matt escaped to try to get Lymond to escape, to give an opening for Lymond, right? And then when Matt realizes that Lymond hadn't made an escape, he's like, oh, did yon greetin' ween stop you? As in, like, did Will stop you? And Lymond had every opportunity to say, yes, I did try to escape, and Will stopped me, but thank you for trying anyway. But Lymond didn't do that. He said, no, I didn't go. Matt, you senseless fool. And I just love Lymond's honesty here, because he probably thought maybe about lying to Matt, which would have made him feel better about his reason for dying in his last moments. Like, he didn't die totally in vain, like Lymond at least tried. But Lymond is so respectful of Matt that he was just honest. And I really like that. Then Lymond, in typical Lymond fashion, blames himself for absolutely everything when Matt goes to say to Lymond that he wants to give Will a bit of a punishment. Lymond says, no, it's my fault. It's my fault. So now we have this torture scene. The whole castle had emptied itself So had the kitchens and the buttery and the brewery and the bakehouse and the stables and the buyers. This is page 342. Everyone has come to see Lymond get tortured. And Lymond puts on a show because he's Lymond. Give us your tongue, they say. Come on, come on. So it's just so funny that Lymond is just like, I'm just going to make them laugh. And he, as much as Lymond is highly intelligent and good at speaking, I think partly he just loves the back and forth of, I know that Dunnett uses the word verbal lash, but I think verbal acrobatics is what Lymond also really likes. And he had a whole crowd to do it with, and he was so totally happy. Then of course he must have seen in the distance Christian, and then he stopped talking. And then they start torturing him even more, and I really like this scene. Lymond saw Christian a long time before this happened, and he accepted a lot of torture between when he was able to finally let Will know that the reason is because Christian is here and get Christian away. And then Christian comes down and everyone finds out that Christian knows Lymond, and Christian admits that he's always known Lymond and Lymond's voice. And I mean, this makes a lot of sense to me because they would have crossed paths at some point. They would have. And we know that Will Scott and Christian grew up together or spent a lot of time together when they were younger. And so why wouldn't Christian have come across Lymond? You know? So that makes sense there, because I was a bit concerned. So the fact that she does recognize Lymond's voice and is basically tells Lymond, I've always known it was you. It implicates herself. She says such a noble line in page 344. I don't care, snapped Christian, if there are 2,000. I'm not accustomed to denying my friends in public. Goddamn, Christian, you are such a good woman. I really like the captain here on page 345 who was like, Jesus, that's crafty. He wouldn't have pipe up in case the lassie linked his name with his voice and let on that the two of them... ... The captain puts 2 and 2 together as to why Lymond was being quiet, and Will's like, stop making Lymond look good. Lymond fainting is hands down the cutest thing ever. I shouldn't say that about someone who's just been tortured and stabbed in the shoulder and lost a very close friend. But it is so cute how he kind of starts babbling at the end of it. He's saying, restored without loss to the parent trunk, ulnar radius humerus, and then there's a pause. And he says, not very, said Lymond rapidly. Not at all, in fact. What's he meaning there? He was already half fainting at that point. Was he replying to something there? So this is top of page 346. Right before he faints, he says, not very, not at all, in fact. Who was he replying to? I mean, I feel like in his stupor, just before he's about to faint and his vision is blackening, he's imagined someone saying something to him and he's replied to that someone. Someone has asked him in his head, are you okay, Lymond? And he said, not very, not at all, in fact. Are you following what I'm saying here? So like Lymond has just been let go out of these chains. He's like checking all of his wrists and saying he's all like everything is intact physically. And I think he's had a vision that in his head, just before he's about to faint, of someone saying to him, we know that you're physically okay, but what about mentally? And he says, not very, not at all, in fact. 100% he pictures his mother, potentially, or even Eloise saying that to him. Okay, so Lymond gets thrown into this prison, which is not a prison. It is the kitchen storage area or something in Threave Castle. And I wonder if you can actually tour Threave Castle and they have a storage area. I want to do that. And Buccleuch, Scott, and Will Scott have their typical father-son argument, and Will, like the flip-flop that he is, goes back and forth with his loyalties and doesn't give up the name of the other men, which is really good. And Watt puts him in with Lymond, which I think is kind of weird, not gonna lie. Like, Watt Scott knows that his son Will has just betrayed Lymond, and Lymond has every reason to want to kill Will. Like, we know that Lymond wouldn't kill Will because we know that Lymond is a good guy, but in Watt's head, he surely must be thinking, well, if I put my heir in with Lymond, who is just betrayed, is there a chance that Lymond might kill him? Like, I don't think Lymond was left with any weapons down there. Oh, and he had just been tortured, and he has a shoulder injury. But even then, I don't know. I mean, it just seems a bit kind of like of an oversight. If I had a child and that child had just betrayed someone, I wouldn't put that child in the same room as the person they've betrayed. This scene with Will and Scott down in this little prison storage area, I really liked. It was fantastic, I think, and very satisfying to start to get. For Lymond to really get through to Will a lot about himself, and in this scene we get Will actually questioning a lot of things, to the point where by the end of this scene, which it ends on page 352, Will has actually completely rethought his position on Lymond. And it's just, this really just annoys me because Will's stupidity and inability to think and look, not that Lymond has helped Will. Lymond could have really helped Will by making himself look a lot better in front of Will. Like, this is half Lymond's doing because Lymond just really enjoys making himself look bad, and is really bad at pointing out his good qualities. It's his greatest weakness. But also on Will, because Will, with his inability to see the truth and betraying Lymond, getting him captured, and then within one conversation now being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have captured Lymond, he's kind of good and I want him to be free, really annoys me, because in his process of having to figure that out, Matt Turkey has died. And Lymond knows that too. I wanted to point out some cool things though in this conversation that Will and Lymond had. This is from like page 348 through to 352. The conversation is like pretty chilled out until Scott accuses on page 348 of Lymond holding women cheap, which is when Lymond first gets aggravated, because previously he was just like chilling out, lying down. There was that beautiful description of him lying down, actually. The butter yellow head, impeccably neat, and a bag of meal under it. The silver spark of burst points and the blue of light cloth at shoulder and raised knee. Lymond gets up from that position as soon as he's accused of holding women cheap. Today you murdered a friend of mine. You treat that very lightly. I hope this intolerance and his honesty and his infirmities break their way into your imagination and into your insufferable vanity. That's my favorite line of this part, is basically Lymond saying, I hope that you finally realize that what you did today was reckless and it's ended a man's life, and I hope that that gets into your vanity and your imagination and breaks down whatever world you've got going on in there. This here is Lymond at his best. What Scott says actually totally to spur Lymond into getting angry was, go on, explain my own motives to me. Or if you won't explain yourself, shall I try? Someone once said you hated women, and you do, don't you? You despise everyone, even yourself, but above all you hold women cheap. I wonder how much of that was Will Scott and how much of that was verbatim Andrew Hunter. And then Lymond goes on to basically try to explain to Will, you know, the truth of Margaret Lennox, and how bad she was. But there's this one moment on page 349 where Lymond basically says to Will, well, of course I knew that you were escaping with Mariota. I allowed it. So Will finally realized that he was manipulated by Lymond to get Mariota out, and that's what Lymond wanted. And then he says, no, it's because you wanted rid of her, I expect, as with your younger sister. And Lymond just says, as with my young sister. Like, it must have been so hard for him to say that. Can you imagine? Like, he agrees with Will completely sardonically. And once again, this is part of Lymond's self-punishment. He he kind of just lets the blows fall. And the bottom of 351 where, I mean, I actually didn't get this. So there was a bunch of letters that were being sent to Aaron that could apparently exonerate Will Scott if Lymond was ever captured or killed. And what's confusing to me is that Will knew that that he copied in his own hand the same letters that they were going to give to England, and Lymond made him do that. And Will says, well, you made me do that, so that's a problem. And Lymond basically says, I tore those letters up, it's fine, because I'm on your side, you damned fool, said Lymond. I'm very confused about this whole part. I'm going to have to reread it, but why did Lymond then make Will copy those letters and to send them to the English in the first place? Like, why did he need to do that at all? Like, a part of me thinks that maybe Lymond made Will copy the letters to send to the English in order to basically say to Will, well, don't leave me, I've got this hanging over you, so if you leave, I can prove that you've been selling information to England, and that would mean that you'll never be able to be accepted again back with your father. But then Lymond has decided in his own mind, without saying anything to Will, to tear those letters up. Like, there would have been a moment when Lymond was probably in his room and he was thinking, am I really going to send these letters to implicate Will Scott? Am I really going to do that? Is that really who I am? And Lymond last minute has torn them up and said, this is ridiculous, I would never do that. Or he just made Will copy those letters to England in order to make Will psychologically think that, you know, he can't leave Lymond, but Lymond never had any intention of sending the letters in the first place. I mean, this was a bit convoluted reading this, to be honest, but Lymond saying to Will, because when Will says, but you tore them up, why? Like, Will cannot, for the life of him, imagine why Lymond would do that, and Lymond just says, I'm on your side. Too simple a reason for Will. Will thinks that there's like 9 layers of hell within Lymond. And there's just one layer, and that layer is that he is a good person, and he just has to put all of these other 9 layers of hell on top of himself in order to defend the fact that he's good. Agnes coming back, and do I believe that Agnes would have wanted to come back and just let Will Scott out of the, like, is it believable that Agnes would want Will Scott out of that little storage area? Maybe. It's kind of a weird request, but maybe. I don't know, I'll overlook it for now. All right, this is on page 353. All right, said Scott, making up his mind, rather to his own surprise. So Will has made up his mind and surprised himself with making up his mind to leave the lock open, the bolt open, so that Lymond can escape. And then he goes to bed, although it was a long time before he fell asleep. Well, I bloody hope it was a long time before you fell asleep, Will, because you just let a man escape. Good decision. You let Lymond escape. But he would have been free, and with Samuel Harvey, if you hadn't have done this, and also Matt would have been alive. So, Will, I hope that you have many sleepless nights over that. Many. This is definitely the first chapter where I have been truly kind of frustrated and annoyed with Will. It's like the honeymoon period with Will is over, and I'm like, oh no, like a bull in a china shop. So then we cut back to Mid-Coulter with Sibylla, and this is like Sibylla with Mariotta now, who is, because Mariotta's back in Mid-Coulter, yeah. This is just hilarious what Sibylla says. Oh my goodness. Page 355, Sibylla says, incidentally, if it interests you, my guess is that Lymond hardly knows you exist. And if he was really trying to get at Richard and annoy Richard, he wouldn't have done it through Mariotta, because Lymond respects women more than anyone else in this book that I've seen come across. And by respect, I don't mean he's not a gentleman towards them. What he does is he respects women in their ability to be as cutthroat as men are and as intelligent as men are. I love this quote that Sibylla says about Richard on page 356. One thing is that the most serious thing in his life is his country. Oh. The other is this: the only thing that could kill Richard is lack of stability. That's so cute. Richard just wants his life to be so perfectly ordered, and when it is, he would shine. It's just such a cute little character trait that Sibylla has recognized about her eldest child. And also how she says, I also wonder when a delicately reared child sends a court into fits with a riddle which I invented myself. I love the picture of Sibylla sitting with Lymond or Francis, because I think Sibylla would have had Richard and then she would have had Lymond, and she would have noticed that Lymond is very much more interested in poetry and literature than Richard was. And, or maybe it was also just worked out that way, because if Richard was the heir, he would have probably spent a lot more time with his father learning the ways of being a baron or something like that. But either way, I can imagine Sibylla, like when she was a bit younger, just thinking, what poem and riddle can I make up for my son today? And that was one of the ones that she would have made up and maybe said over the dinner table, or maybe in Francis's bedroom when she's teaching him things. That's just so cute. I imagine this is when he was like 7 or 8 or 9 or something like that. I don't know why, this is bottom of 357, Sibylla is saying that she's disappointed in Johnny. Confused about this, because was she disappointed because Johnny had overheard the fact that Lymond was about to be captured by Will Scott, and then he set off at a gallop? That was what we read in the end of the end of the last chapter. It was not his fault that he was too late. So that was page 328. Is Sibylla disappointed that Johnny didn't get there in time? There's a really pertinent section here on page 358. So Christian's come back, and Christian and Sibylla are basically agreeing to each other, or like revealing to each other that they've all been on Lymond's side, and Mariota is like, what? Oh, poor Mariota though. If they all just had spoken out loud and been frank with each other, so much of this could have been avoided, and maybe Lymond wouldn't be captured, you know? But there's this really pertinent quote here that Sibylla says, we're congratulating each other on how clever we've been, quite without reason, for there is the dear man in prison at Thrieve, and here we are doing very little about it. This, I think, also just demonstrates the helplessness of the female situation of the 16th century. Like, at the end of the day, there's probably very little that they could have done. I think Sibylla is annoyed at herself for not doing more than what she could have, but at the same time, she's kind of despondent about the fact that here we are, women, talking about things that we're helpless to change. It's just really kind of sad. And another part where Sibylla also is talking to Tom Erskine, because Tom is so confused as to why Christian wants to help Francis. He's just like, why? And Sibylla says, because she thinks one of her lame ducks is about to turn into a swan. So that's page 359. And then her lenses flash in the glare like scarlet lamps. I think Sibylla and Christian are similar in this, because Sibylla also thinks that Lymond is a swan and not a lame duck. All right, so next scene we have Lymond, who has crossed country on foot, probably been running for 24 hours with a sore shoulder after previously being tortured, and he ends up on the Scottish side of River Tweed, throwing pebbles idly into reaming waters. It was a restful, delicious scene. Plum clouds like amaretti hung in a blue sky. I really want to make amaretti biscuits now, oh my gosh. So that's top of page 360. What a great scene. So Gideon Somerville picks up Lymond, who is a day late to see Samuel Harvey, which is sad. This is from Gideon's point of view, and he's just like, look, this is on page 360 again. It was a familiar, elegant presence, but quieter, less dynamic than he remembered. So Lymond is subdued, and Gideon's going, this is not normal, Lymond. Like, this is the charismatic guy who stole all my livestock, questioned my daughter, psychologically torturing her, and then gave me back even more livestock. This is the guy who was sitting in like an old kitchen garden tied to a rock, singing and saying poetry in the middle of broad daylight whilst he was waiting for the Scottish to march on the English. I think Gideon, there's two parts of this, because Gideon is annoyed at Lymond for two reasons. The first one is that Gideon is kind of annoyed at Lymond for not showing up on time, because Gideon actually really wanted the bargain to go ahead, because he is an honest guy who wants to hold up his end of the bargain. So he's kind of annoyed at Lymond for not getting there on time, and he kind of takes it out on Lymond a little bit. And Lymond's just like, I was detained, bro. I couldn't get here. But he doesn't really elaborate on that. And then we get in page 361, Gideon's like, my goodness, the guy is drunk and he's disgusted. And I actually was like, oh my God, Lymond's drunk? He crossed country, found some booze and drank them? Yeah, that kind of checks out. Like, I actually believed that he was drunk. But Lymond wasn't drunk. He was just swaying with exhaustion. Like, he was so physically exhausted that he was probably slurring and borderline fainting at this point. He's not drunk. I'm damnedly sober, Mr. Somerville. And he's unsteady on his feet. It actually says that on page 61. It said the master unsteadily, and Gideon crosses the room in 3 steps to have a better look at Lymond, and sees him as faultlessly erect, his clothing a bloody pulp, his eyes brilliant. And Lymond speaks quietly and basically says, not drunk, I'm sick, don't be alarmed. It's merely the effects of insufficient transport over damnable country in inclement weather, trying to get away from Buccleuch's bloodhounds. Yeah, Lymond would have left in the middle of the night. Maybe it would have been like 1 or 2 a.m. And they wouldn't have realized he was gone probably till about maybe like 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. So he had a 6-hour head start potentially, which is fine, except for the fact that he would have needed to outrun hounds and horse. So he would have been not walking. He would have probably been running for a whole bunch of this time. And the reason that he swum a lot was to lose their scent. Keeping in mind, this was the middle of the night that he would have been running. I hope that it was a cloudless night and that he at least had the moon to help him. Gideon's like shock at Lymond's exhaustion is like twofold, because he's thinking, oh my God, that he's sick, we need to help him. But also Gideon, I think, feels guilty for accusing him of being drunk, because Gideon's such a nice guy. Anyway, Lymond goes to bed, unresistingly goes to bed. That is exactly how we want Lymond. We want him to go to bed unresisting. Then we have this great scene, which is probably one of the most satisfying scenes of the book, where we finally get a conversation between Lymond and someone else, which is Lymond and Gideon. So this is from page 361 through to 366, where we finally get Lymond saying, I think, giving us away his true intentions. Lymond in this section, in this scene with Gideon, basically gives all his opinions on the politics of society and what could happen, what couldn't happen, what might happen, what is practical, what's impractical. And in saying this, he kind of gives way that he's not necessarily just a man of Scotland. He's a man of the world who is trying to find what is likely to happen, and with what is likely to happen, he tries to make the best of it. Of course, there's that line where Gideon says, it's on page top of 362, I wish to God that you'd just for once talk in prose like other people. Gideon, if you say something like that to Lymond, he's just going to continue to talk in prose even more. You do know that, right? Which is exactly what he does in the next sentence. He just like goes on and quotes a whole bunch of poetry for the next 2 paragraphs. And Gideon's like, damn it, why did I say that? Really interestingly here, this is where Gideon is starting to figure out that Lymond is actually probably a good guy, not just like on a person-to-person relationship, but a good guy in terms of political motivations. Gideon is saying, you quoted Ascham, I wondered why. And I think Ascham was, if you have a look in this book, Roger Ascham wrote a poem or something called Toxophilus, which is basically about the truth is something that will overcome all enemies. So the Scot, the Frenchman, the Pope, and heresy overcome by truth. All manner of enemies quite overthrow through Christ. So this is like kind of an allusion that to the fact that Lymond thinks that nationality is less important than humanity. and that nationality should be less of a divide than what it is. Of course, after Gideon says, well, you quoted Ascham, I wondered why, Lymond then, because Lymond does never allow himself to look good, that is against his constitution, so then he sort of denies he ever said that and says, but I quote all of these things, I echo everything, don't get caught on one thing or the other. Lymond, just admit that you're a nice guy, oh my gosh. Gideon knows. So they have this conversation, and sort of like a conversation that could be between two friends, and the barriers of nationality lift, and they're just talking as equals until the end of this in page 365, where they start talking about Margaret Lennox, and then Lymond gets all defensive and those barriers all fall again. He goes back to sort of wanting to talk about Harvey and his own exoneration rather than all of this political stuff. And this is what's such a shame, is because Lymond, I think, the core of it, and this is what Gideon is seeing, is that Lymond really wants to help the world. He wants to be a man of the world. He wants to be a man of politics where he can help bring the greatest good to the greatest number. But he cannot do that unless he clears his name. And so I think he's so frustrated at the fact that he has to put all of his energy and resources and it's overstretched himself into trying to clear his name and finding Samuel Harvey. So they've had this really good discussion, and then Gideon reminds Lymond, well, I'm sorry about Harvey, and suddenly they're kind of just back to a Scottish man and an English man facing off against each other. But I have a question for people who have read this book. I wonder if you've picked up on this. This is on page 364, where still the discussion between Gideon and Lymond. And then Lymond says, were you at the Battle of Pinkie? And Gideon says no. And then Lymond says, I was. It was as precise an exhibition of honest emotion as you're likely to see. Lymond wasn't at the Battle of Pinkie, was he? The Battle of Pinkie? Right at the beginning of the book. I'm sorry, Lymond. Have I read this wrong? Are you going to give me a spoiler by... Like, he lied to Gideon just then. He wasn't at the Battle of Pinkie because the Battle of Pinkie occurred... So this is at the end of the opening gambit. Buccleuch comes back and says, by God, you've not heard the news. And the English have collected an army and they're on their way north. We're summoned instantly to the governor to fight. So Lymond, dear God, Lymond must wait. Then they have the Battle of Pinkie, which follows that, because I looked this up. The Battle of Pinkie, also known as the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh, took place on the 10th of September 1947 on the banks of the River Esk near Musselburgh in Scotland. So it was kind of just south of Edinburgh, I think. And that's what happens just at the end of the opening gambit. And then here in chapter 1, part 1, we have, on Saturday, September 10th, that was the Battle of Pinkie, the English protector Somerset and his army met with the combined Scottish forces on the field of Pinkie outside of Edinburgh and smashed them to pieces in a defeat as dire as any of the Scots had suffered since Flodden. So they've had 2 big defeats in a row, Flodden and now the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh. On the same day, near Annan, on the other side of Scotland, a man rode a broad-faced pony into a farmyard and stopped. So this was Johnny Bullough coming to his men with, and we have the discussion between Matt Turkey and Johnny Bullough the first time we meet them. And then Lymond pops up only a few minutes later, lavishly dressed from the sack of his mother's home. Lymond didn't have a chance on September the 10th to ride across country and dress and look good. I'm sorry. Lymond was not at the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh. On page 364, am I missing something? Like, am I going crazy here? Lymond says, were you at the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh? Gideon says no. Lymond says, I was. That is a lie. What? Lymond, why are you lying? I'm so confused, but he couldn't have been there. What am I missing here? Am I being absolutely silly? Or is this actually a lie? Anyway, you're all laughing at me. It's fine, don't worry. And then Gideon takes Lymond to his house, and Lymond cannot deal when people do nice things to him. He's so confused. Lymond is all flustered because Gideon's like, come on back to mine, to Floor Valley, and you know, it'll be lovely, and Then Harvey will come back and we'll have our little reunion. And Lymond is leaving. This is page 366. Hand on door, Lymond had stopped, his face expressive of conflicting emotions. I should dearly like to know why, he said. As in, like, he wants to know why on earth Gideon is helping him so much. There's no obligation now. Gideon has fulfilled his end of the bargain. And, you know, that was something Gideon did not even know clearly himself. But Lymond, conflicting emotions, he finds it so hard to accept help in the name of just genuine help. He's just so distrustful. Poor baby. Poor baby. Then we have, oh my God, Sibylla and Will. Oh my goodness. So Will gets back to, they go back to Mid-Coulter? Yeah, arriving at the castle in a flurry of women, armed boxes. She heard the story piecemeal from Will. So Sibylla finds out that Will has, that Lymond has escaped. It says here on page 366, Will Scott, who was monosyllabic, and Agnes, who was jubilant. And then she drew her own conclusions. She's taken one look at Will, who is just like barely able to speak, and Agnes, who is super happy, and realized that Will has orchestrated helping Lymond escape with Agnes, and now Will is just feeling so confused and frustrated in his head, and Agnes is just feeling like the little heroine she is. You know what I'm thinking about Will Scott as to what really towed him over the line of betraying Lymond in the end? I can't help but think, yeah, he had Andrew Hunter in his ear, but also this all happened after he probably knew that Lymond was going to disband the Mend. And Will, being Will, the little teenage rebel that he was probably like, you can't just disband the Mend. This was my thing. This was my thing. Look at me, Dad. Look what I can do. I'm a rebel. I'm such a tough guy with Lymond. And Lymond goes and disbands the men, which robs Will of his like little rebellious haven. Maybe partly Will's way of retaliating against Lymond disbanding the men was him capturing Lymond. Like, that's how immature he is. Like, if you're going to do that, then I'm going to do this. Sibylla and Will Scott is the best possible combination of characters. Because of this, Sibylla is as brutal as Lymond is with her insults. She hands them out. But the difference is, because Will thinks at least that you have to be polite to ladies, he doesn't retaliate against Sibylla as he does with Lymond. So he kind of is with Sibylla despite her just like laying on insults. So there's one here at the bottom of 367 where, well, basically they've been discussing that there's been a raid on Dalkeith and Christian Stewart has been taken. Oh, sorry, I need to go back earlier because Scott is saying, are you sorry that I captured Lymond? I can tell you his brother won't be. And Sibylla says, sorry, yes, aren't you? And then it says at the end here, said the Dowager mildly. Both Sibylla and Lymond say things mildly all the time, like mother, like son. And then Scott is basically saying, well, because Sibylla's saying, don't you want to get the truth out of Lymond? And Scott's like, well, no, the truth is going to harm Christian Stewart. The only thing that will help her now is a good piece of solid lying. And I've got the job of doing it. I suppose she's back at Bog Hall. And Sibylla says, no. She takes her friendships a little more seriously than that. Basically, Sibylla is saying, giving a dig at Will, who saying that Christian takes her friendship seriously, but Will has not taken his friendship with Lymond seriously. And of all the people in the world, Will is the most flaky friend, if you can even consider him a friend, that you have ever come across. Then we get Lymond back at Floor Valleys, and the very cute and like heartwarming scene where Kate, who's like super annoyed, walks into the room where Lymond is, and he's just sleeping in front of the window on a chair, and she sees that he's injured and she can't deal with the fact that she's injured, and then gets annoyed at Gideon for having her maternal instinct aroused. Oh my God, that's just so cute. I think I'm very similar to Kate in many ways. Like, I would still be annoyed at Lymond, but like, damn it, He's injured, damn it. It says here, head thrown back. This is page 369. Head thrown back, Lymond slept. It was an uncommonly sound sleep. Oh, that's so sad. Stretching one finger, Kate drew aside the stained jerkin without rousing him. Oh, then she sees he's injured. So Lymond must have figured out someone's come to see him when he was sleeping on that chair, and maybe he woke up when the door closed or something like that. He was definitely asleep when Kate was standing over him, but then he's woken up and realized that someone had just been kind of looking at him when he was sleeping, and then he puts two and two together when Kate comes back and says, page 370, "Was it you who came in just now?" And Kate says, "It was. And I had a good look at you, so you might as well sit down." And Lymond's like, "Why, are you going to bathe me?" So Lymond's realised. So Kate's come in, seen how injured he was, has then organised all of this. Lymond knows he's kind of got Kate's, like, pressed her maternal button. He's just rubbing it in at this point. And the hilarious thing is that he manages to get everyone out and locks the door because obviously he wants to bathe himself. Did he put stitches in his shoulder? It's too late to put stitches in. Like, his wound is... Anyway, we won't go there. We won't go there. We're going to overlook the medical weirdness of how he has a shoulder wound and no one has really looked at it except for himself. Anyway, when Kate tries to get in, Lymond's just like, "Mistress Somerville, the proprieties." Such a ridiculous joker, and they kept on banging on the door, and he would have just been like doopy-doo, just like washing himself and completely neglecting to reply. All right, so then we cut back to, is it Dalkeith or somewhere? I really like how Gideon calls Lord Grey Willie. He does it on like page 373, but also on just at the end of the chapter in page 376. It's just so cute. Old English mates. We have all of this scene where Meg Douglas is there on page 373, where they're talking about Samuel Harvey, and Margaret says, "I do take an interest in him, as it happens. I came here expressly to make sure that he returned to London directly. I believe Mr. Palmer leaves today." Mr. Palmer is that engineer guy. Anyway, so Meg has come over specifically because she's heard that Lord Grey has ordered Samuel Harvey up because Lord Grey still wants to get at Lymond. So he's like, yes, let's bring Samuel Harvey up. And in fact, I think it's kind of cute because at the end of this chapter, we find out that he's really badly injured. Like, it's not a small injury, it's a bad injury. And Lord Grey actually kind of feels guilty about bringing him up for that reason, and actually says that to Gideon, like, "I wouldn't have brought him up if I knew that your man Lymond couldn't make that meeting." But Margaret Douglas is interesting here. She wants Samuel Harvey back because she's found out about this, and all I can think of as the reason that she really wants Samuel Harvey to go back is because she truly does think there is something that Samuel Harvey knows that could bring to light Lymond's innocence, which is quite suggestive that she thinks there's a good chance that Samuel Harvey could make Lymond look good, and she does not want Lymond to look good. She wants Lymond to suffer. So yeah, Christian is stuck here, and Christian kind of admits to everyone that she knows Lymond, including Margaret. I don't know why she was so honest about all of that. It's just, when she's doing everything she can to help Lymond, I am kind of with Will here thinking, Christian, how far are you going to go for Lymond? Christian, you were just so good. She's just risking a lot. She's risking her own skin, and she has to know that. She should have kept quiet. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough for this chapter. I will see you next time.